This week on CNBC Sport, the podcast. The most famous American lacrosse player alive, Paul Rabil, speaks with me about the Premier Lacrosse League, the league he co-founded in 2018. Now in its 8th season, Rabil talked to me about how he's banking on the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics being the catalyst the league needs to make its next jump, which he hopes will involve selling off teams to localized owners.
I hope that in the next 10 years, we'll have individual owners and call it 16 teams. So covering most of the map in the U.S.
That's all coming next on CNBC Sport, the podcast. Pleased to be joined by PLL founder, probably the most famous lacrosse player there is, Paul Rabil. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You have some exciting news, another funding round. Give me your pitch. Give me your PLL pitch. In other words, from an investor standpoint. So you've got a whole new round of investors, $100 million. What are you telling them in terms of why they should be investing in this league?
Well, you could start at sort of the macro forces around in real life experiences, and this being an asset class on Wall Street that has a premium tied to it. You can look at stocks like MSG and that are market capped at the valuation of the Knicks, not including the Rangers valuation, and why you can make an argument of spin outs. So the sports business has gone from having living Picassos on your wall to real operating companies. The premium, I think, is tied to the scarcity component, and then this is live IP. So if you look at the sports media rights landscape around the world, this year it's $67 billion, it's up 10% year over year. Half of it is in America. But that alone, it was like sort of second lead indicator to a lot of investors into pro sports. Now you have more diversified revenue streams. So the pitch for the PLL is all of that only makes sense if you're the tier one property of a discipline. And it's our estimation that lacrosse is nowhere near where it can be. The difference between us and call the Big Four is that we didn't have a pro league in the 1900s, which there's so much generational connection in the communities that have spawned into national and international IP and rights. So it's our job leveraging new media and I think a different model to try to accelerate that growth and play catch up.
All right, so tell me about the different model. What's the model?
So we're a C Corp, we're a single entity. So when we launched, we were wholly owned, so venture backed, different than trade associations like the NBA, the NFL. There was professional lacrosse that existed before us that went the path of selling teams at $0 in revenue, no IP, no fan data, and we felt like under a essentially individual sports model like the UFC, WWE, F1, we could grow faster, build IP, generate real revenue, and then approach the path of selling teams to where you can attract, hypothetically, better, more sophisticated, sort of like institutional sports owners. Because that's ultimately a place that we need to get to if we want to become a top 5.
And how close are you to that place today?
Well, the reason why we announced this fundraise and took on the capital opportunistically is we're in this window of opportunity, I think, from now until lacrosse's return to the Olympics for the first time in 100 years. Gross net eyeballs are going to be at a place where lacrosse has never had it. And, you don't build a business around that necessarily because that's just a presumption. But this window from now until then and shortly after is where we're working with our board meticulously on a model turn. And from a timing and from a personnel standpoint, is that something that we can pull off?
So is the hope to start selling teams by 2028?
Sooner or thereafter.
So you have a group of investors now, dating back several years, who all have a small piece of this league. What is the proposed exit strategy for these investors so that they can make a return on their money?
Well, the most recent round led by Ares, they have exposure at league and team level. Joe Tsai does as well, so does Arctos.
Just to interrupt there, that means at the team level, because they're not yet owned by an owner, they would have, what is it, like the first right of refusal? Or?
Well, no, we don't have any ROFRs.
Okay, no ROFRs.
What's attractive is that if you own a percentage of the entire league, when you sell off teams, you can treat those team sales as proceeds to the business, maintaining your equity.
Okay.
And then looking at our first 8 teams and the next 8 and the 8 after that. So is unique to team sports leagues that are traditionally trade associations, but something that we felt a lot of conviction around that for lacrosse to cut through, we're going to have to move faster and also sort of prove ourselves, which is in large part what we've done through the first 8 years. And Doc O'Connor, who's on our board, says the most difficult thing to do in the business of professional sports is get a media rights deal, which we were able to do in 2021
with ESPN.
With ESPN.
Mm-hmm. But still, is there an exit strategy for the full league? Is the idea here to one day to sell this thing to a TKO or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's if a group was interested in strategically at a majority or overarching acquisition perspective, we would absolutely have those discussions, whether it's TKO or you even look at groups that have been doing this like Providence, and even Aries and Apollo. Apollo's looked at various leagues. They didn't stop at the NHL 20 years ago. But we think there are multiple exit strategies. One being you maintain the C Corp and keep going as we discussed. The other being team sales. And there's probably some hybrid models.
Describe the state of the league today. Clearly, you look at the TV ratings. They go up every year. Mm-hmm. It seems as though lacrosse continues to gain popularity in college quite a bit. Certainly at the youth level, it gains. So where are you in terms of the evolution of this thing in your mind? In other words, is this going to be a 30-team league one day? Like, where are we in the sort of...
Yeah, I mean, I hope that in the next 10 years, we'll have individual owners and call it 16 teams. So covering most of the map in the U.S. And ideally, we have more exposure in Canada because it's Canada's national team sport.
And would you then stop sort of the touring element and you would just be playing in home locations?
That would be the reason why we choose to sell teams, is you have these owners who aren't going to want to invest in a team if they only get the matchups once a season. So they're going to want a home and away model. And that flip will cause us to determine in advance the reallocation of revenue on an annual basis from media, sponsorships, tickets, merchandise, and youth. Also, like top co-retention. Do individual owners come in and have a minority position, or are they only buying the teams outright? And then how the two, most importantly, can work in concert such that we're continuing to drive national and international recognition around the PLL and WL. They're driving local and valuations increase. Let's
talk about like the actual kind of nuts and bolts of the league, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that are watching this that probably don't know all that much about the PLL. You know, what is the average salary? Like, you know, are people able to make sort of a full-time living from this? And how has that changed from, let's say, when you played to today?
So we'll start when I played. My rookie wage was $6,000 for the season. And when I had a championship underneath my belt and an MVP, I had the max wage in the league, which was $14K. I fancied myself more of an action sports athlete at the time because I was early on YouTube and Facebook and X now and Instagram, and I had brands coming to me not because of my participation in Major League Lacrosse, because they didn't have a network deal, because of what I was doing on social. And I was able to reconcile with sort of that modern athlete that is not in the Big Four. But when we launched the PLL, Mike and I set out of the gates to raise enough capital to quadruple player wages that were on average, call it $10,000. We've since grown year over year, and we've created new wage opportunities like our championship series. Just think of it like the FA Cup to the EPL. And then we have marketing addendums that the league writes specifically to star players where they can come in. So there are players in our league that make north of six figures. And if you think about that on scale, well, there's a new CBA in the NWSL and in the WNBA, but Caitlin Clark's rookie wage was $76,000. We have players making that. And NWSL, prior to the 2024 CBA, that range was about $35K to $80 and a at-home stipend. So the difference, though, is the MLL, when I was playing, was still very part-time. The owners looked at two avenues. One being, we're going to go after this first-team All-American at University of North Carolina men's lacrosse player, and we're going to present an opportunity where, yeah, we can't pay him all that much, but he can get a full-time job to support it. NWSL at the time was looking at a first-team All-American women's soccer player and saying, we can pay you $35,000, but if you take your job on Wall Street, we understand. But if you take it here, you got to move here and live. And I mention that because that's going to be a big part of our turn too as we pursue team sales, is getting players full-time living in market in the community and compensating them even more than they are now.
And so how do you do that? Is it a sponsorship play, or in other words, Is it a media rights thing where it's like you're just kind of counting on the viewership to go up so you can jack up the revenue when that deal comes up?
Well, it's all of the above. The business has to keep increasing by double digits year over year, is what we did last year too. So media rights is really important. We have a 5-year deal right now with ESPN, so that's fixed on its growth. So then you look at the sponsorship space, and I think that's actually where the rubber meets the road for us in making a decision on a model shift, because you could argue that we're more attractive to advertisers than a traditional team sports league where you have to spend at multiple layers: league, teams, players direct, sometimes union, on-site activation, production house to bring it to life, pay with ESPN. And so we built a model where you get it all in one enchilada. And so brands find it easier to take on the risk of a lower profile sport like lacrosse because they get access to everything: global IP, team IP, marketing rights to players, on-site activation with fans, and we even have a buyback program with ESPN where we can take a Ticketmaster or a Nike or an IBM and help them get their spots and dots on during when the games are broadcasted live. So sponsorship for us is our biggest category and where we need to continue to grow it. Obviously, there's a lot of room to grow on the ticket and merchandise front and the youth business. Even that Love B, they started in youth and then as like sort of the foundational element. We view our youth as more of an investment into participation because as more kids are playing, we think more kids will watch, which will help the revenue of the business. As revenue goes up, we can pay players more.
Has NIL changed PLL at all yet?
I think that it's an interesting question because I think that NIL disproportionately benefits us or emerging sports than it does the big leagues. So if you take the NBA, for example, NIL is so powerful now that if you're a second round draft pick, you're going to probably stay in college.
Yeah.
So it shifts the draft dynamic a little bit. And I don't think that's good or bad. I just think it's game changing. And for us, if players are in college getting paid, part of that indication is they're building a social presence and celebrity. And the bigger the college lacrosse players get before we draft them, the better for us.
Along those lines, is there anything you guys can do to help make a star? Because it seems to me that may be the next bridge you guys have to cross. I mean, I'm speaking to the most famous lacrosse player right now, and you don't play in the league anymore. Like, how do you make the next you or someone that's even greater than that?
Well, I think we got to make someone that's exceeds far beyond the thresholds that I was able to eclipse. Because if I was our crossover star, if I was our Caitlin Clark or Tiger Woods, then the MLO would have worked. And I think these huge superstars that come once a generation, if you're lucky, they can actually turn a business overnight. Yes, CBA renewals and timing came in with Caitlin Clark. And there have been a ton of women's basketball players that have driven value to that league, just like Billie Jean King drew value to women's tennis before Serena Williams and Jack Nicklaus before Tiger Woods. But then you have these tipping points. But Caitlin Clark and Tiger Woods, within 2 years of going professional, quadrupled their peer group's wages. So it's not just viewership, it's commercial interest. I think what the biggest stars in sports historically share in common is they kick everyone's ass every week.
Right.
So the old adage of worth the price of admission, that's them. So people are going to want to go because they have to see this person score 10 points a night. And it's difficult to do that in lacrosse like it is in ice hockey, like it is in global football. And why Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, who's averaged a goal a game for their career, are just phenomenal standouts. And Alex Ovechkin, same thing. So we haven't had that dominant of a force, but that has to be at like sort of the epicenter of then league and network partner and other storytelling around them to really like humanize them and find relatability for fans.
Is the only other thing that I can think of other than pure dominance is somehow playing the sport in a new way, right? Like in other words, like correct. Caitlin Clark hasn't dominated the WNBA yet, but she's by far the most compelling figure from a viewership standpoint because she plays that game differently than everybody else does. Is that possible in lacrosse?
100%, definitely. So Conor McGregor fought differently. Tiger Woods won the Masters by 18 strokes. You mentioned Caitlin Clark. Michael Jordan played the game differently.
Right, even before he won, he was clearly the most compelling figure.
Definitely, yeah. And Tony Hawk did a 900. So Charlotte North, who is the top women's lacrosse player in the world, she plays the game differently. It's why she's been able to cut through. She has the largest social media following of any professional lacrosse player, men or women. So you absolutely need to have that. And it would be, this is a long-form conversation, which I was looking forward to sitting down with you on, because it would be overly reductive for me to say, like, we need to develop our drive to survive, and then boom, we'll have a bunch of fandom around athletes. Like, there's a lot that needs to fall into place. And if we were to raise money around the principle of having a crossover and what that could do, it might attract some capital, but it'd be really risky.
But have you thought about doing your own drive to survive now that you've said that? Yeah.
You got to be everywhere. I actually think the film and television world is some of the most historical juice applied to sports leagues and disciplines. Queen's Gambit in 2021 or 2020, a 14-day run on Netflix, doubled chess.com participation. Mighty Ducks, some surveys said that it doubled ice hockey participation at the youth level. And so when you're a sport like lacrosse that hasn't had mainstream sort of like breakthrough coverage, scripted or unscripted, you can disproportionately benefit. Even hockey right now, as you've seen heated rivalry and off campus, and yes, they had the Olympics, but it was that like combo punch of three that has led to an exceedingly high performance for them this year.
Another emerging sport, this volleyball, the League One volleyball playbook platform seems to be to try to connect everything from youth sports through high school to even through college to some degree and then into the pros. Can you guys get more connected with high school and college lacrosse?
Yeah, and I probably buried the lead because part of our wholly owned model isn't just the commercial opportunities, but it's to verticalize lacrosse. And I think League One Volleyball has done a great job of that. It's something that we do, and why we have our youth arm called PLL Play and our nonprofit arm called PLL Assist, is that our job is to get sticks in hands, goals on field, coaches' educations, create kind of more accessible versions of playing the game like street lacrosse. And we did that with Rich Kleiman and Kevin Durant, who are investors. And if we think about an attractive investment, it's not just having the benefit of the pro leagues, but it's also having the direct pipeline all the way down to the youth level. And then obviously the Olympics is jumping the shark to the next big one.
Yeah, let's talk about that. A couple weeks ago, I spoke with Don Garber, who I know has sort of been a mentor of yours to some degree. And he was talking a lot about how important this World Cup is to the future of Major League Soccer. How important is the 2028 Olympics to the future of PLL?
Oh, I mean, LA 28 is anticipating 4 billion people watching the games. Now, that gets distributed from discipline to discipline, but we have fought and successfully gotten the second week of programming. So we'll be up against the closing ceremony and the basketball final. And, early indications were told to me that the first allotment of tickets sold out in 48 hours for lacrosse. So there's good hype building. LA is an important market to us. I happened to be on the pitch team led by Joe Tsai 4 or 5 years ago when we were trying to build up momentum to make the run to get back into the Olympics. I think it is as much about us focused as a league to build potentially new competitive properties leading into the Olympics.
Like what?
Like the Four Nations Face-Off or the World Baseball Classic. Prime our stars to be the next Gabby Thomas, who went from 20,000 followers on track and field to 2.5 million. And then work hand in glove with NBC around programming, right? It's really important to, be on the mothership. And figuring that out is, I think it's really important to get right.
So on that end of things, I would imagine that the next frontier for you guys, like it with any emerging sport at the professional level, is to cross over to the person that knows nothing about lacrosse, right? Whose children don't play lacrosse, who's a sports fan, but they've had more or less no exposure to the sport. And maybe the Olympics gives them that first exposure to the sport. Is there a coherent plan that you are thinking about right now to say to that person, look, I know you already spend so much time watching sports. I need you to substitute some of your time to give us a chance.
You're on it. It's a really valuable proposition and a very challenging one. I try to approach things just like universally and spiritually when I think about attention is like we can't say I need you to do something, because human nature is like, well, I'm not going to do it then. So like I think fandom is a lot of times in the hands of the gods, and you have to focus on innovation. So I'll give you an example, what we're doing right now, and I'll tell you what our probably our best comp is as we continue to morph in the future. Our ABC broadcasts are produced differently than our ESPN Plus and ESPN mains, because we know we have lead-in programming that sometimes exposes us to 1 million plus people in markets that have never seen lacrosse before. So we do really cool rule animations to just sort of like, bring you into the action you're about to see. The comp is the NHL. Youth participation in lacrosse actually looks like youth participation in ice hockey. And in some years we exceed participation of ice hockey in America. If you think about the run that the NHL has the past 2 decades, and I think about Ted Leonsis, who has also been a mentor, and his technology background and his sort of risk aggression to bring on bloggers into the press conference, little things like that to adopt to modern media times. If you look at their venues, 80 to 90% of those attending never played ice hockey. So they've done a really good job of getting into the community and making their teams, and sometimes their civic centers, i.e. their stadiums, feel like a place of congregation. And then the education, you probably remember in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, the laser puck tracking technology.
Yeah, because that wasn't a huge hit with people.
It wasn't a huge hit, but we learned from it. And we learned, for example, we changed our ball color in year 1 from white to optic yellow because tennis invested millions of dollars in research to see what color picks up 100+ mile-an-hour serve on green surface. Turns out it's a version of green. So there are things that we can learn as students of the industry. And then, I'm not in a position that Don Garber is to have a World Cup. I think he's playing, chess in a lot of ways. He sees the momentum of soccer globally in America, but he also has to compete with tier 2, tier 1 leagues that are ahead of MLS for talent and viewership in America. And basketball is the second most popular sport in the world, and the NBA truly does have global presence, as does the NFL. We're not them. And that's why I point to ice hockey. It's probably a closer curve and would be a really exciting one if we took on that trajectory.
How are you using AI at this stage?
In a number of ways. So at the company, we have hired a head of AI. And that person has come in to work with business unit leaders around building artifacts to help their creative ambition, their technical ambition, and their sort of data analytics daily dashboard to inform them to make better decisions. We operate like a lean startup. In year 1, we had 33 full-time employees. Now we're just over 100. And so we have that head of AI. Each of our business units have AI captains that are responsible for sharing information underneath. And then again, I view it as an accelerator and a way to reach scale, not as a way to displace talent.
You have a lot of money coming through the door. Is there 1 or 2 innovations, something that the PLL is not doing today that you want to be doing next year, 2 years, 3 years from now?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think that the sport, by and large, unbiased, is an amalgamation of the best games in the world. And it has the history to point at that. The first rule book was written by a French Canadian named George Beers in the mid-1800s, whose classmates were James Crichton and James Naismith, who drafted, based on their lacrosse participation, ice hockey rules and basketball rules. And so you see basketball, especially those who are crossover athletes. We have Drew Brees at our games in San Diego this weekend, and he was on air with ESPN talking about if there was one sport that he tells his kids to play, it's lacrosse because of its crossover potential. And it's physical and skilled, yet you really only experience it when you're playing and on the sideline. So we're encouraging a total disruption of the way that we're producing our games. Games, you could have 45 cameras at the Super Bowl, but it's still mainly camera A, B and C slashers on the 30-yard line, some handheld 8Ks. But the games have been shot largely the same way. So we want to explore not just the way that, take YouTube, for example, as from a market share standpoint of viewership on a daily basis, even with smart televisions, but Gen Zs who are consuming there and like jump cutting and different ways to edit. I think we're at a place where we can be at the forefront of that. We liken ourselves at the forefront of social media when we launched in 2019 and dedicated the primary bulk of our resources to building our own internal production house, because we knew how important velocity of content would be. Every league and team has caught up and surpassed. They have more capital than we do. So we're on thinking about ways to progress. And then I would say, like, we got to get the fundamentals right. So a lot of the uses of proceeds are going to PLL season expansion, the WLL. We talked about storytelling, and then making that big strategic decision coming up.
This may be an out-of-date stereotype, so correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly I think when I was in high school growing up, there was a cultural phenomenon / stereotype around lacrosse, which speaks to like the lax bro, like there's a certain type of person that you envision playing this sport. Has that changed? And is the cultural association with lacrosse something that bothers you?
It's a good question. I appreciate you asking. I think that because of the waves that we've created over the last decade as a sport, it's a novel thing to discuss. But let's all keep in mind, college lacrosse began in 1876. It was running shoulder to shoulder with baseball, football, and basketball in America. All of these leagues faced high segregation, and we moved through it as a country during the civil rights movement. But there's a reason we talk about baseball and Jackie Robinson and Arthur Ashe and tennis. And so sport has largely been a reflection of America. I think if you think about modern day lacrosse, a lot of the institutions that are successful on the field were a bit like what was successful in football in the 50s and 60s. A lot of Ivies won championships.
Princeton just won again.
Princeton just won. And so it's less about the individual and more about the luxury of access that you have if you're fortunate enough to go to an institution that has that caliber of network effect. That's my story. I grew up alongside my brother in a townhome in Stedwick, Maryland. Our dad sold paper, our mom was an art teacher. We played rec sports. We started lacrosse because our neighbors gave us their backup equipment. And I think every athlete you'll see at professional ranks and even across other sports, what makes sport really dynamic is they have their own origin story. We can talk about the amazing sort of come from nothing stories in football, and then you can also look at the greatest football player of all time, and Tom Brady, and he would have been fine if he didn't break through the Drew Bledsoe injury after being drafted the last pick in the NFL. He'd have been okay, smart guy. And with a lot of great access. So I think the variations are out there. I hope I'm being direct in answering your question. I don't think it's something that we necessarily need to overcome. It's not a bad thing that in America you are given the opportunity to get a great education and pursue opportunities, be it in finance or real estate or elsewhere thereafter.
I think it's also possible that the growth of the women's game has softened the image of the men's game to some degree.
100%. The women's sports is in an amazing place, and that's mostly due to our peers in the WNBA and the NWSL. But even I mentioned the Williams sisters and other individual sports, even Ronda Rousey. But it's been a long run and a difficult road for women in business and women in sports, and that tipping point has happened. And there's I think like a blank canvas approach to women's lacrosse that I feel from partners who want to be a part of it, and even our network partner in ESPN. I'll give you an example. I'll take a couple of WL players to get up and a couple of PLL players to get up, and the women show up on set, and like all of the hosts, I can't wait to ask them about what school they went to, and they talk about, I went to Northwestern, you went to Northwestern. It's a rivalry. There's just like this freshness and excitement that excites me.
Congratulations on the fundraise. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Thanks for having me.